crop is getting thin, water's getting warmer. I'm a hippie kale farmer. I'm a hippie kale farmer. I'm a hippie kale farmer. Growing old.
All right. Thanks everyone for your patience there. A lot of moving parts anytime you put on a virtual event, but you know that most of the time people are going to show up. You don't have to worry about traffic or weather or anything like that. So it's reliable. Kunach Chish Hat Yagudi. Thank you all for coming. My name is Jonas Lamb, and I'm an associate professor at UAS, where I work at the UAS Egan Library, and I also coordinate the One Campus, One Book program. I'm very excited to be with all of you for tonight's conversation, Ocean to Table. Let's talk mariculture, Alaska, along with Max Stanley, Chelsea Goucher, Dr. Schery Umanzor, Hannah Wilson, and Dan Lesh. But before I introduce tonight's event and the panelists, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the homelands on which many of us gather tonight. Our UAS campuses reside on the unceded territories of the Occoquan, Tontoquan, and Shiatquan on Tlingit Ani, also known as Juneau, Ketchikan, and Sitka, Alaska. We acknowledge that the Tlingit peoples have been stewards on the land where we work and reside since time immemorial, and we are grateful for that stewardship and incredible care. We also recognize that our campuses are adjacent to the ancestral homelands of the Haida and the Tsimshian, and we commit to serving their peoples with equity and care. We recognize the series of unjust actions that attempted to remove them from their land, which included forced relocations and the burning of villages. We honor the relationship that exists between Tlingit, Haida, and Tsimshian peoples and their sovereign relationships to their land, their languages, their ancestors, and future generations. We aspire to work toward healing and liberation, recognizing our paths are intertwined in the complex histories of colonialization in Alaska. And we acknowledge that we arrived here by listening to the people, elders, lessons from the past, and their stories carry us as we weave a healthier way forward for future generations. And as part of the necessary work toward healing, I want to take a minute to acknowledge my own awareness of the shortcomings in organizing this event. As you may already know, or otherwise observed during the pre-event slides, the Tlingit, Haida, and Tsimshian people have been practicing mariculture for millennia. Subsistence activities, including the gathering of seaweed and gathering an abundance of intertidal bounty, continue to be practiced today. And these historical uses are also well documented in Tlingit oral literature. However, despite the abundance of culturally significant knowledge, the composition of this panel lacks an Indigenous participant. And I mean no disrespect to the experience, knowledge, and perspectives of the panelists present, but by acknowledging this shortfall, I hope to remind myself to seek meaningful inclusion of Indigenous and other underrepresented voices and perspectives whenever I have the opportunity to organize or contribute to cultural events. Okay, thank you for allowing me to acknowledge my shortcomings. A little bit of context for tonight's program. The One Campus, One Book program seeks to provide members of the UAS community, especially first-year students, with some common ground for conversation. Excuse me. Through the celebration of a common work of literature, we're also able to start each year on the same page. This year's selection, Eat Like a Fish, My Adventures as a Fisherman Turned Restorative Ocean Farmer by Bren Smith, will serve as a centerpiece for explorations of mariculture, food security, local foods, and our deep coastal connections to the ocean. We're excited to announce that Bren Smith will be coming to Juneau and Sitka in early March, and we hope to announce additional events leading up to that visit. Check out the One Campus, One Book website for details, and I'll throw that in the chat in a little bit. This event is being recorded, and the archive will be posted within a week to the UAS YouTube channel. We'll begin with we shifted the order around. Oh, no, we didn't. Okay. We'll begin with Dr. Schery Umanzor, Research Assistant Professor at UAF College of Fisheries and Ocean Sciences. Each panelist will introduce themselves. They'll discuss their work and then respond to a question from another panelist. We'll conclude tonight's event with questions from attendees, and we'll try to take the last question around 8:15. Attendees are asked to please mute your mic during the panel presentation. Attendees are encouraged to submit your chat through your questions throughout via the chat. I'll collect those and share them with the panelists as time allows. When you do submit your question, please indicate if you would like to unmute yourself and voice your question, or if you would prefer to have me ask on your behalf. And then for those that choose to unmute and ask your question or make a comment, please be respectful of others by keeping your comments brief. And lastly, anyone submitting racist or otherwise inappropriate comments will be removed from the event. I'm very excited to be here with all of you tonight, and I'm very excited to introduce our first panelist, Dr. Schery Umanzor.
Thank you, Jonas, and thank you everybody for joining. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm gonna share my screen very quickly. Here. And put myself in presenter mode. So my name is Schery Umanzor. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Alaska Fairbanks here in Juneau. And if I had to describe in a few words what I've been doing for over a decade, I will say that I've worked in food production systems in aquatic environments. So I first started around 10, 11 years ago growing seaweeds in tropical waters. They look very different than the seaweeds that we have here in Southeast. But nonetheless, they are seaweeds as beautiful as they are over here. After a few, I'll say, yeah, like after a year or so, starting with seaweeds, I incorporated the production of white shrimp in flotation. So this is a little different than the systems that we see on land. This is actually building cages that float in the water, and shrimp grows pretty much inside the cages without escaping. So let's call it, it's a more eco-friendly approach because we don't have to cut mangroves to put ponds. We actually just build cages and have them in flotation for months, like for 4 months until shrimp could be harvested. After going to seaweed and shrimp and a little bit of sardines, I decided to move to food production systems on lakes, so total different systems. And this was trying to build in the rationale that you don't need to pump water out of the lakes. You can actually build floating structures and actually put your corn and beans and tomatoes and avoid irrigation pretty much. Also explore a little bit of growing alophytes, which are plants that are very salt resistant. So I was growing purslane and sea asparagus for a little bit. I guess over the years, I just grew very fond with the ocean and I missed it very much and came back to seaweeds, but in this occasion, increased the challenge by coming to temperate waters and move away from the tropics. So this is pretty much what I do now. I grow seaweeds both in the ocean and in tumble culture, but cold water seaweeds, which are very special in my opinion. And this is really what brought me to Alaska, contributing to the growing industry in mariculture. So right now as a professor, my job is really to try to address some of the industry needs in regards to seaweed production, although I'm moving more to shellfish as well, hopefully including scallops and abalone to the coming years. So I will leave it there for now, but happy to take any questions.
Max, are you available to ask Schery a question?
Yeah, definitely. Schery, what do you see from a research perspective as what's needed most in Alaska mariculture?
That's a great question. So when we think of mariculture, I'll say it's not only the production side of it, like growing things. It's also what do you do with the things that you grow. So I'll say that right now what we need is a big push for market development.
Thanks, Max. Thanks, Schery. And I realized for the other panelists, I kind of threw a monkey wrench in the order there. So maybe I'll open it up and see if anybody else wants to ask Schery a question, and then give maybe Chelsea a little bit of a heads up that she'll be going next. Maybe Schery, I'm just Shidi, I'm curious about the white shrimp in flotation. Do those do they require any like any food inputs?
That's a great question. Yeah, actually, so to elaborate on that, there where we were growing these, there is a moratorium for 6 months. So what fishermen did was collect the bycatch pretty much and freeze it. and then they use that bycatch, which is pretty much left over, and throw it in the cages, and that's what they give them for feed. But we also grew seaweed on top, inside the cages, and if you pay attention to seaweeds, they grow a lot of things on top of them. So actually it was a great combination of having them both growing together, because the shrimp kept the seaweed clean from epiphytes.
Thank you. Okay. And maybe I'll just ask this question from the chat. What kind of yield? And I imagine that was on the white shrimp.
Yeah, it really depended a lot on the stocking density, and I'll have to give the numbers like in kilograms. So one of those single cages could produce somewhere between 50, well, depending again on the stocking density, from 50 to 75 kilograms every 4 months. But I have to admit that there wasn't a good track record of what the actual yields were, because the participants, so farmers, I'll say, they sell the shrimp as bait, and they really didn't keep good track over time.
Thank you. I won't deviate from our format anymore. So up next, I will invite Chelsea Goucher from Foraged and Found to introduce herself and her work in mariculture.
Hi, everyone. My name is Chelsea Goucher. I'm a co-owner of Foraged and Found, and I'm a lifelong Alaskan, born and raised in Ketchikan. And Foraged and Found, we are working currently to make shelf-stable food products using wild harvested Alaskan ingredients. So we have a line of salsa, a line of pickles, and a line of pasta sauces made from bullwhip kelp, as well as several different SKUs of sea asparagus pesto made with sea asparagus. And currently we are making everything from wild harvested materials, but we're extremely interested in mariculture for obvious reasons. As we grow as a business, as we scale, as we expand, our lines and our different options, different SKUs, we're really interested in seeing where mariculture goes. We're very interested in seeing what can be done to cultivate bullwhip kelp and to really encourage the growth of farming of that particular commodity. And it's really important to us because, we had a great idea. Our company started as just a bunch of friends, pickling stuff and harvesting things and getting out in the woods and out on the ocean and having fun and kind of seeing what you could do with the abundance of things that we're so grateful to be blessed with here in Alaska. And as it's grown, it's really taught all of us a lot about what is available to us, and also how can we best showcase it and share it with the world, share it with the country, but also, protect the resource and protect what's here. And so for us, really part of our mission with Foraged and Found is, okay, we've found these great resources that have been here and been used, for thousands of years by the people that have been here on this land before us. And now that we've kind of discovered it and brought it, into a contemporary American format with salsa and pasta sauces and things like that, it's like, okay, now that we know this great resource is here, how can we, continue to share it, but also scale it responsibly, support a responsible growth of industry, and really do things the right way. So we're interested in mariculture because we'd love to see cultivation of things like sea asparagus. We'd love to see cultivation of things like bullwhip kelp, so that as we grow, we can actually support other Alaskans, farming sea asparagus, farming kelp, and be part of creating a whole value chain that really is about, building an economy in Alaska, creating a new set of vertical industries that are interlocking, and also doing it in a way that both, lauds the environment, but also protects it. while, allowing us as Alaskans to do really challenging things like value-added manufacturing, which is complicated here for so many reasons, geography being the number one thing. So that's kind of us in a nutshell, and why we're super interested in mariculture, because we think that it is our future and where we can really go to expand our business to be something greater than it is, and part of really helping, diversify the economy in Southeast Alaska.
Chelsea, if I may ask you a question.
You may.
Thank you. I'm curious, what is the creative process of coming up with a product? Say, for example, the sea asparagus.
The creative process. Well, I would have to, my business partner, Jen Brown, she actually came up with most of the recipes, her and some other friends originally. But the creative process is really unlimited. She has a culinary background, so she has some work that she's done as a chef. And I think that's very helpful. But I think any of us that have spent any time in Alaska know that there's just an amazing abundance of items here, in the forest and in the ocean that are available to eat, and that are incredibly nutritious and incredibly unique in what they can bring, to someone's diet. And I think really the sky's the limit. So something like sea asparagus, it's really just a matter of, like with any ingredient, looking at it as, as what it is, a vegetable, and say, okay, this is salty, it's crunchy, it has a bright flavor, what might be something that could be, created with it, and something that could be shelf stable and readily available. So we came up with the sea asparagus pesto, and, everyone knows what a pesto is. And our sea asparagus pesto just uses a lot of sea asparagus, and there's still some basil in it too, but it's just a little bit different. It's a little bit crunchier, a little bit brighter. We haven't put a lot of lemon juice in it. And, that's really probably the most fun part of our business, is coming up with the different recipes and trying out different options, and using the wild harvested ingredients, but also working with our other suppliers that source our other ingredients to see what works best, what's going to represent our brand best, what kind of ingredients do we want to purchase, like what kind of company do we want to be, do we care about, a certain white sugar, cane sugar substitute, do we care about having things that are organic, the whole process of going through that and establishing, what cuisine we want to bring, but then also how do we want to get it in front of people. It is a fun process. It's probably, it's the creative part of the business. So it's really enjoyable, and really the sky's the limit. When it comes to pickling the kelp and things like that, it was really just kind of people playing around and experimenting with it, because it's something that is part of the local tradition, and it is something that people have been doing. And so it's just kind of expanding on that and throwing in some different ingredients and some different elements of different cuisine to be like, okay, what can we do to make this unique and make it something a little bit different that people would want to try, and not be instantly adverse to the, like, oh, it's kelp, it's seaweed. Because some people, myself included, seaweed can be intimidating. It can be, oh, that's going to be an intense flavor. Maybe I've had that before and it wasn't for me. And so it's really making it approachable so people can, expand their minds and try something different.
Thanks for the great question. Maybe we'll take one question specifically for Chelsea from the chat real quick, and then we'll have Max Stanley go next. So, and it sounds like someone wants to ask Max this question as well. This is from Jonathan and Tony. What are some of the biggest challenges you've faced in processing and selling kelp products?
The biggest challenges we faced in processing and selling kelp products. I think that there is, I don't know where to begin with the challenges. There's a lot. Obviously, again, like kind of what I mentioned, is being a value-added manufacturer in Alaska is difficult for a lot of reasons. And geography is the number one. Transportation costs are high. A lot of costs are just high for us to begin with. And it's really important for us as a business that we, we have to build something sustainable. We have to build something that the people that are working for us and the people that we hire to do the different contract work, that they're getting paid a fair wage. And so as we scale our business, the wild harvesting of sea asparagus and bulk kelp, it's difficult to be able to get the quantities that we need and which we're permitted for by Fish and Game, while still paying people a wage that they deserve for the labor, and then also making it economic for our business. So we're balancing all these different things. And so it has been hard. It's been difficult to find, people to work with to help us harvest, because we're at a point in our business where we outsource a lot of our harvesting to different fishermen who are able to work with Fish and Game under our permit to harvest for us. But of course they're busy because they're fishermen and their priority is fish. And so kelp is like, they're super excited about it because it's kind of the secondary potential income stream for them. But at the end of the day, fish is first. And so it's balancing that and then making sure that we pay them well, that we're doing everything as we're supposed to. It can get really complicated. And we have to be careful that we follow special guidelines that Fish and Game gives us about how much what percentage we can harvest from each bed, different things that ensure sustainability and that are important, but again, really lend themselves, in my mind, to why we're looking towards mariculture as a potential future, just more sure source of the raw material that we need.
Thanks, Chelsea.
Yeah.
Yeah, it occurred to me listening to your response, and then also just in some conversations with Max, we'll go next. What a unique kind of arena you're working in, where like there's the potential to work kind of as the farmer to bring in, to harvest your own products, but you're also working with others. And some of these products have that potential outside of the permitting and the resources to, get there in a boat. Really, there's no cost for those products other than kind of your labor and the permitting. So it's pretty unique. But thank you for sharing your experience. And I did put a link in there in the chat to Foraged and Found if folks want to check out Chelsea's company and maybe order some sea asparagus pesto. My mouth is watering right now. All right, so up next, I'd like to invite to the virtual Zoom mic Max Stanley of Barnacle Foods.
Thanks, Jonas, and thanks for everyone who's attending tonight. As Jonas said, my name is Max Stanley. I'm one of the owners of Barnacle Foods, along with Leah Heifetz and Matt Kern. We're based here in Juneau, and we're a food manufacturer that uses primarily kelp as our main ingredient in all our products. We started in 2016, just selling at a farmer's market, did well, and that kind of inspired us to keep going. Now we have been operating for the last 5 years, and we have about 10 employees. We're sold in over 500 stores, Washington, Oregon, California, throughout the rest of the country. We're definitely seeing some interest in kelp as a new food source, and we're seeing some good momentum. I guess another addition that I kind of want to focus on in this panel of something that we've taken on and started to do is a little deviation from what probably a normal food manufacturer might do. Most people aren't working with such a new supply chain and having to deal with all the sourcing aspects, but along with that kind of adds this other really interesting aspect. So as Chelsea mentioned, all wild harvest of kelp is managed under permits by Department of Fish and Game. And right now those permits are issued on an experimental basis. So in our talks with Fish and Game, we've kind of wondered what would it take to have this become a established management plan, and what's needed to get there. And they identified a handful of different research gaps and stuff that they're interested in learning. Right now, they don't have a ton of knowledge, and they don't really have the capacity or the resources to focus on kelp and seaweeds throughout the state. So one of those research gaps was an understanding of biomass and abundance. How much kelp, what species, where is it? As we looked into that problem or looked into that gap a little bit more, we started to find that there's this whole network, both in North America and globally, of kelp mappers. And we realized that, well, we're out there all throughout the summer going to different kelp beds. And so it wouldn't be too much more for us to start doing these surveys to start get some baseline data of the abundance and the distribution of kelp. And so beginning in 2021, we started doing drone surveys when we were out harvesting. We expanded and continued that program into 2022. And so I think to date, we've flown 8 different kind of kelp areas that would have multiple beds within that. And this year we did, say, 25 different flights. And so what that looks like is we'll take out just a consumer drone, a Phantom, DJI Phantom. We'll send that up and it'll fly a grid over the kelp bed, just taking a bunch of overlapping images. Then we bring that back and we developed a open source software with a program with some open source software this summer. So it will take in those drone images, it will stitch them all together, and then it will use another piece of software from the Hackeye Institute in British Columbia that will then identify kelp. And so from that, you can get a sense of what the canopy cover is of any given kelp bed. And so from there, it's great that we have this data. It's now something that will allow comparison between beds and it'll allow year-over-year comparison. We're hoping at some point there could be a correlation between canopy cover and biomass, because biomass is really what Fish and Game uses in all their management. And so we're going to look to continue these surveys. As I mentioned, there's this entire network of kelp mappers out there. This work is being done in California, in Oregon, in British Columbia. This work's being done on a global scale using satellites, but this work hasn't really been done in Alaska. It was a few years ago, some surveys were flown in 2018, 2017, but since down around Prince of Wales, but since then, no one's continued to do these surveys. So we're going to continue to kind of champion this project, and we're looking for partners also to work with because we have such an expansive coastline. There's so much kelp out there that we're hoping that we can get other people interested in doing this work as well. And a little bit in contrast to at least the west coast of the United States, California, Oregon, Washington, where they have started doing a lot of this surveying work at these historically low levels of kelp. Whereas in Alaska, it seems, at least anecdotally, we're still at a fairly stable state historically on the levels of kelp. So I think it's pretty important for us to, and us as in everybody, the collective community, to get some baseline data with which we can compare if there are any changes year over year, and just to really understand the species more. So that's not something that probably most food manufacturers are doing. And it definitely adds a little bit to the workload, but we're really excited about it. One, just so we can kind of contribute to the overall just body of knowledge. Also, we can have some metrics on making sure that, well, we're not having impact as we harvest. And then it's also just neat to kind of use the drones and have a whole computer science side of the business. So that's kind of in a nutshell that this other program that we've been doing the last few years. So yeah, happy to answer any questions on the drone program or on Barnacle more traditional lines of business. So feel free.
Thanks, Max. So I'll remind folks that they're welcome to submit questions via the chat. Just let me know if you want to ask the question yourself, or if you'd prefer that I ask for you. And Hannah, do you have I'm sorry, Chelsea, do you have a question for, oh no, I'm sorry, I pinned the wrong person. Hannah's got the question for Max.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Max. I'm really excited about your project. It's it's been cool to kind of follow along a little bit and hear more about it tonight. I guess speaking of the way that you guys are such a unique company and kind of, you know, going outside the norm a little bit for a food production company, I'm curious if the industry continues to develop. I think how a lot of folks hope it does, and that we see a lot of growth in the next few years. How do you guys hope that Barnacle is going to develop as a company, like in terms of developing new products maybe, or, you know, kind of diversifying the work you do? I'm just kind of curious about your dream vision.
Definitely. Yeah. Thanks for the question, Hannah. We're definitely interested in growing, and we've been growing, and we want to continue to grow, or want to become a household name all throughout the country. And one strategy that we've been employing to do that is to kind of throw out a whole bunch of products that we think taste really good, and see what consumers like. So we have right now 6 different kind of product lines, and within those there are a number of different variants. And so we put them all out there and see what the consumer likes. And then we kind of are able to hone in on those, and then kind of refine, because making 22 different products is a considerable amount of work, with all the different containers, all the different ingredients, all the different equipment. So you can't make everything, we're finding. So we like to figure out what the customer actually likes, and then focus on that. But then also, kind of, as Chelsea touched on, the creative aspect, where you continue to make other ones. You find good pairings with kelp and see what it might be a good use. So as we kind of refine on some, we'll continue to explore more, and hopefully be able to find something for everybody out there. And we're seeing that kind of parallel also on the national level with other businesses, where there's more and more kelp products coming out, and we definitely see it as a rising tide lifts all boats. So as more and more consumers see different kelp products on the shelf, they're going to be more interested and open to trying those kelp products. So we think there's good momentum for Barnacle, and there's good momentum for the industry.
Thanks, Max. Got some comments. Everybody loves the salsa. I was gonna pose a question in the chat for anybody to chime in on. What's your favorite Barnacle or Foraged and Found product, or what are you harvesting, pickling, or putting up and eating yourselves? And let's see, I suppose there was a question from the chat earlier directed at Chelsea, from Jonathan, but I believe you covered most of it, Max, in terms of like kind of the challenges you're facing in terms of processing and selling kelp. I think I heard, you know, just the product, getting the quantities that you need in, and maybe trying to change the way people think about kelp. Is there anything else you'd like to add to that?
Not exactly, but I see another comment in the chat. Maybe or a question that maybe I'll touch on. It's from Nick Goal, and it says, why is there such an emphasis on bull kelp and not sugar or ribbon, which is easier to grow? Are there opportunities for sugar/ribbon in your products? Great question, because yeah, we are huge proponents of bull kelp, but we do have some of our products that use sugar and ribbon kelp. So our dried product, well, I guess sugar kelp. Our dried products can use sugar kelp and do use sugar kelp, along with our new chili crisp. And those products were kind of crafted in mind, especially the chili crisp, to be able to use sugar kelp, because that is what is readily available from farms right now. But with bull kelp, it is just unique in its structure from pretty much any other kelp, at least any other North Pacific kelp, and even Atlantic kelps I'm familiar with, and just having that stalk and then the stite. And so that stalk really differentiates it from a culinary perspective of you get this real kind of vegetal texture and crunch that you don't find with a leafy portion from, say, ribbon or sugar kelp. So that's kind of one difference. And so it has these unique culinary properties, but it is also just unique in its own right. That bull kelp only grows along the Pacific coast of the United States, really from Baja to the Bering Sea. So it is a little bit more of a product differentiation for the Alaska growers, whereas sugar and ribbon kelp can be grown on the East Coast, where it can be grown much cheaper because they are on the road system and because they have a much more mature market for it. They're probably at least 10 years ahead of us. So I think it's going to be challenging moving forward for Alaska farmers to compete with East Coast kelp, just on a pure price point standpoint. And so I think we're going to have to figure out other ways to differentiate ourselves. And because of the challenges also of Alaska with the remoteness and which lead to the high costs of transportation, the high labor costs, I think at least for the near term, it's going to have to be a pretty high value product that you're going to be selling. And food is one of those high value ways that you can sell kelp, food, cosmetics, but some of those other uses that kelp is going into of like pet food or fertilizers, chemical, that's going to be, I think, challenging to hit a price point at. So a little bit of a wandering answer, but that's kind of what we see. Thanks.
Thanks, Max. And thanks for the good questions. There's more coming in, and we'll be sure that we get those to the panelists, maybe provide everyone an opportunity to respond to those after all the panelists have had a chance to discuss their work. And I apologize to the panelists for completely ruining the order that we decided that you would go in. Up next, we've got Hannah Wilson from the Alaska Fisheries Development Foundation. I will turn it over to Hannah.
Yeah, thanks, Jonas. No worries about the order. Yeah, nice to see you all here tonight. Thanks so much to Jonas for organizing, and excited to be here with these other fine folks as panelists and learn from you all. Yeah, so I'm Hannah Wilson. I'm the development director at the Alaska Fisheries Development Foundation. I think I'll share a little bit about my background and kind of how I became involved in mariculture, and then talk a bit about the role that AFDF has played in the early development of the industry as well. So I grew up here in Juneau, like a lot of folks in Alaska. I think just personally my connection to local wild foods and really being tied to the natural world here has always been, you know, just a big part of kind of my values and a big part of why I moved back to Alaska. And, you know, in Alaska, I think, as you all know, we've been really on the front lines of conflicts between kind of economic growth, particularly in the form of resource extraction, and obviously needs for jobs in our communities. And then that really strong reliance on healthy ecosystems and wild spaces for food security, as well as cultural vitality and identity. And so I've just always been really kind of interested growing up here in how those two things can cohabitate a little bit better to kind of create more durable community resilience and sustainability. So I finished my master's in natural resource policy and management in the spring of 2020, which was kind of a wild time to be in transition and looking for a new job, and applied to be an Alaska Sea Grant Fellow, knowing that I really wanted to be back in Alaska. I was down in Montana and working on natural resource policy issues, but really didn't have a background at all in mariculture or really in marine issues at all. But was really fortunate to be selected as a mariculture policy fellow, housed with Alaska Sea Grant for a year, and then with NOAA Fisheries. And I just want to say a little plug here for the Alaska Sea Grant Fellow Program. If anyone's working on their master's or PhD and getting close to finishing up, I really highly recommend the program. It was a really amazing experience and a great way to kind of get plugged into the marine industry in Alaska. So yeah, pretty early on in my fellowship, kind of as I was getting up to speed on the mariculture industry, kind of getting a handle on, you know, where it was, where advocates wanted it to go, I was just like totally hooked. I was like, this is awesome. I'm so excited. And I think, you know, there's no silver bullet at all for many of the challenges that coastal communities in Alaska are facing. But I think what particularly resonates with me is that it's a pretty holistic approach to addressing a lot of different issues that we're facing and that are really pressing, climate change adaptation and food security, as well as economic security, especially as we're seeing, these natural systems and the industries that rely on them, like fishing, change so rapidly and really kind of in unpredictable ways. So during my Sea Grant Fellowship, I got to work on a lot of really cool projects and get kind of a crash course in mariculture that was totally new to me at the time. And I got to work quite a bit with the Alaska Fisheries Development Foundation. So then at the end of my fellowship this past spring, I started my current position with AFDF. And I'm just going to kind of wrap up here by talking a little bit about our role in mariculture development. It's definitely not the entire focus of AFDF's work. We've supported a broad array of fisheries and industry development work since 1978. Mariculture is pretty new for us. And our mission is to identify opportunities common to the Alaska seafood industry and to develop efficient, sustainable outcomes, provide benefits to the economy, environment, and communities. And I think those three pieces are just really integral to all the work we do. So kind of considering that mission, back in 2013, the AFDF board kind of identified mariculture as a new area that they were interested in really supporting development in. I think a large part of that is due to the championing of our executive director, Julie Decker, who she comes from a fishing family. She lives in Wrangell, and I think really saw the opportunity to kind of complement the way of life in a lot of coastal communities in Alaska and really build on what was already there rather than competing. And so in 2014, NOAA provided a grant to AFDF to lead the Alaska Mariculture Initiative. And that was really just an opportunity for there to be some capacity and space to really bring the potential of the mariculture industry to the attention, I think, of Alaskans and particularly to state leadership. And so kind of thanks to that effort, Governor Walker got excited about mariculture and created the Mariculture Task Force. And that was kind of a group of stakeholders just convening to really talk about, how can we develop this industry in a way that's inclusive, in a way that's sustainable, in a way that actually supports Alaskans. So progress really took off from there. The task force created a development plan and an action plan. Dan, who's I think up next here, was really involved in a lot of that work and probably can answer any questions about it better than I can. And that was really kind of just creating an industry for, kind of a blueprint for industry development, and identified some barriers and kind of areas of opportunity, and also created this goal, kind of a very big goal of building a $100 million industry in the next 20 years. So in 2021, the task force sunset, and that was replaced by the Alaska Mariculture Alliance and the Mariculture Research and Training Center. And these are kind of partner organizations. They're very new still. They're really building up their capacity in terms of staff and funding. But I'll just kind of put in a final plug. Definitely keep an eye on those two organizations here if you're interested in following along the development of the industry. We're really excited to see them, particularly the Alaska Mariculture Alliance, move into a bit more of a leadership role, really representing a lot of different voices from the industry. And just to really fast finish up here, I just wanted to share a little quote from our director, Julie Decker, that I think really just kind of gets at the ethos, our ethos as an organization when we think about how we want to see this industry develop. And that is, industry needs to be developed responsibly, and we need to balance urgency with equity and sustainability. With a variety of natural resource-focused industries in Alaska, we have learned a lot of lessons about what works and what not to do. Developing the mariculture industry really provides the opportunity to be very intentional about how we grow this industry in a way that centers our coastal communities, and particularly folks who have been left out of other economic opportunities in Alaska.
Thanks, Hannah.
So I'm gonna dive in here, Jonas, if I can.
Go for it.
With a question for you. I know when you were at Sea Grant, you were involved in working a lot in the permitting side of mariculture. I'm just curious if we are to see 10x plus growth in aquatic farms around the state, what do you think the most pressing or the bottleneck issues in permitting will be that'll come up first?
That's a great question. I saw Michelle Morris with Fish and Game is on here tonight, so she can probably speak to this better than I can. But I think a big piece of it is we just need more capacity at the state. I mean, and at the federal level as well. But all the folks at ADF&G, DEC, DNR, they're working really hard, and they need more bodies to kind of work through these permits, be able to answer folks' questions, and really support farmers as they're getting started. I think there's plenty of other bottlenecks, but just getting to work with agency folks on that portal, like they're so strapped and they are really passionate about this industry and want to provide people with more support than they're able to give right now.
Thanks, Hannah. Maybe we'll take a question. There's been a lot of questions in the chat. Maybe I'll grab one and see if we answered this a little bit in the chat, but do you want to provide any resources? Tracy asked about anything that you would recommend for someone that's interested in getting involved in mariculture jobs, internship classes. I put the link for the Alaska Sea Grant Fellowship that you mentioned into the chat, but any other resources to share?
That's a good question. And I'd be curious about other panelists kind of chiming in. I think it depends on what part of the industry you want to be involved in. Absolutely. I think there are, different opportunities to work with professors, and maybe Schery could speak to this more, but, in terms of research internships, I think NOAA does some internships for undergraduate students as well. I think if you're looking for a job, Dan's probably going to talk about this, but there's definitely a lot of job opportunities right now in the industry to kind of be involved in like the policy advocacy world. So definitely keep an ear out. I think organizations like the Alaska Mariculture Alliance and the Mariculture Research and Training Center are hopefully going to start pulling some of those resources together in a little bit more of a cohesive way. It's still a little hodgepodge now, but I think we definitely want to create a kind of a clearinghouse where those opportunities are easier to find. So sorry, that's not a clear answer, but I think, there's going to be more opportunities coming.
Oh, thanks, Hannah. Do any of the other panelists want to chime in, or perhaps we could definitely transition?
Well, I wanted to mention that also a good option is reaching out to current farmers, because some of them are offering like training opportunities, sort of internships. Not so sure how they work. I guess it will differ from farmer to farmer. And as far as getting involved with university research, volunteers are always welcome. I do have around 7 projects, and they will all be happy to have some volunteers, and they will have the opportunities to work with my students too.
I can also just put in a plug for the UAS Applied Fisheries program. It runs out of the Sitka campus. They're currently beginning to introduce some coursework in mariculture, and they were the recipients of some grant funding to be building a mariculture lab. But I think I put the link in the chat for the aquaculture semester. They run every fall. It's an intensive. They offer, it's a lot of like practical skills for working as a farmer, from, introduction to salmon culture, outdoor motor maintenance, cold water survival, skiff operation, and then some introductions to the aquaculture and lab and an internship opportunity. So check that out. And yeah, there's a lot of opportunity. We'll hear from Bren Smith, a farmer here in March, but I know there's a lot of local people that are involved in this. So make connections. And with that, I'll turn it over to Dan Lesh of the Southeast Conference to tell us more about the market side of things.
Sure. I am sharing my screen and try to go to the beginning. So this is a hairier version of me here on the left with my dad. So I grew up in Gustavus. Just a quick personal story, growing up, we used a lot of seaweed in our garden, like many people do. It ran a business that Gustavus in and served bulk kelp pickles here on the right at every single dinner at our restaurant since the 70s, and kelp salsa and stuff. But that pickles was on every single dinner table as like a condiment that people could add. And so I grew up harvesting and enjoying bulk kelp. So I'm a numbers guy. A lot of times I've been working for the last 7 years with McKinley Research Group, formerly McDowell Group, an economic consulting firm that has, as Hannah mentioned, done a lot of work for Alaska Fisheries Development Foundation and others as the industries has evolved. That's one of many employers out there in this different sides of the industry. So some of these slides actually come from my work there. And I wanted to run through a couple facts just because I'm often the numbers guy for this kind of thing. So we have roughly 8 farms producing seaweed this spring with a total harvest of about 560,000 wet pounds of kelp harvested this spring. There's a lot more under permitting review. And this is a big increase from 2017, when we had our first farms with a harvest, and it was a minuscule amount. Those are in Kodiak. The growth of the farms has now included still a lot in Kodiak, some in southern southeast, and some big ones, and then 2 small ones near Cordova. On the other hand, oysters have been around for a long time. This graph could go back further. You can see about 1 million plus in oysters sold, finished product oysters sold, and about up to 1.5 million or 1.25 million in farm gate values. So industry overall, I think people that sometimes see all the talk and attention on it don't understand how small the industry actually is right now. But the reason that there's a lot of talk and attention on it is just because of the potential. And I'm one of the people obviously convinced and dedicated to seeing that potential come to Alaska. This is me helping 2 weekends ago put a farm in the water near Gustavus. So that's where I'm from. And my friend Brian and I put in a permit application back in 2019, I think, and finally got it permitted last year and got the gear in the water this year. So that's very exciting. It's my friend Brian, but we're just dropping these 300-pound anchors in the water, hoping that our plan's going to work. So there's a lot to learn, a lot of gear. Brian's a fisherman, so that really helps, having that background of working on the water and understanding knots and ropes and boats and safety, like Jonas said, about the kinds of things that aquaculture semester does. If you want to be in this industry, spending time in the water, spending time doing these kind of things can be helpful. I just want to click through. These are some permitted and proposed farms throughout the state. So you can see a cluster around Kodiak, but also around the city, but also around the island. Cook Inlet, you've got a lot of oyster farms, but also some seaweed farms starting up. The green is seaweed. The purple is shellfish, mostly oysters. And then the orange are combination farms with both. A lot of permit applications near Cordova. Throughout Southeast Alaska, although there's only a couple active seaweed farms, but there's several active oyster farms down here in northern Prince of Wales and Ketchikan. So our farms, my friend Brian and I and another friend Terry are developing are here near Gustavus, and then one in Lena Cove near Juneau. I think Schery kind of touched on this a little bit. There's a hatchery and nursery side of the sector. We've got to produce, you're farming, you got to deal with a lot of different life stages, and the oyster hatchery nursery side of things, and for seaweed and oysters and other species is a really critical thing that does take a lot of work and specialized help. So that's a place with jobs. So as I mentioned, the industry is pretty small, but we just announced a month ago that we got a $49 million grant. Southeast Conference, where I'm now employed, is the lead applicant leading a coalition statewide, a lot of different components, tribal folks, workforce development folks, and different nonprofits and industry associations like the Mariculture Alliance are all joining together to try to put this money to work to help advance the industry and to bring it up to scale. So this vision of $100 million industry in 20 years, we're still trying to stay on track with that. And this $49 million will go out to, I think Hannah mentioned, there's just so many components to this industry. There's no one flagship project. There's tons of different things, from marketing to workforce development to permitting and product development and the hatchery nursery side of things. So the goal, though, is still, remains to grow this industry to $200 million in sales over the next 20, 30 years. And I helped to develop these potential growth trajectories, assuming high level of policy investment and adaptation from the state and the feds, and then a high level of government, public sector financial support for the industry for the different bottlenecks. And the majority of the revenue in the future, the potential upside is the largest in the seaweed space. So the growing uses of seaweed are the biggest potential there. But as Max said, currently our industry is focused more on the food and the really high value stuff. If we are to scale this big, we're going to have to get into these, I think, into these other uses, which are more in, green chemistry, kind of chemicals and nutraceuticals, supplements, additives that would go into food products like a alternative meat burger, or even bioplastics and even biofuels and carbon sequestration. But those are all, I'm kind of getting increasingly speculative in terms of markets that are out there. There's a teeny bit about this grant, and that ties into the question that people had about jobs. So there's 49 million plus matching funds going out across the state to different organizations to implement these projects that we have. And there's a Mariculture revolving loan fund, there's governance and outreach, coordination, workforce development. All of this money will fuel job creation, both immediate creation, spending the money, as well as hopefully a self-sustaining industry that's based on, real markets for our goods so increased amounts of farming and processing. But our own organization, Southeast Conference, is hiring right now. We have on our website, which is seconference.org, as well as this grant has a website, alaska-mariculturecluster.org. We're hiring for outreach coordinators or grant technicians and project coordinators, mariculture project coordinators, that'll help us work with all these partners that are getting funded and track the money and coordinate activities so that we're maximizing the use of this funds. It's a great way. I think any of these organizations that you could be working for, including, Foraged Found and Barnacle, is be in the ground floor in a new industry is a great choice, I think, for what to do if you're looking for a job. And I'm sure everyone here is happy to help people talk through different questions they may have. So I'll pause there.
Thanks, Dan. I think Chelsea has a question lined up for you.
Yes, Dan, I guess talking about the Build Back Better grant, can you just kind of maybe provide a little bit more detail about some specifics that are outlined in the scope of work for that grant? And in particular, probably for a lot of people listening in, maybe some more detail on the Mariculture Center that's going to be proposed and developed on Prince of Wales Island. And I'm curious to hear how you think that's going to help move the industry forward, and tying into that, kind of circling back to some of the questions about the challenges in the industry. I mean, I touched on logistics, I touched on, the market and consumer perception and all those things, but another one is just certain infrastructural issues that can make it really difficult as well. So can you just kind of unpack a little bit more what's in the Build Back Better grant and how it can help propel the industry through addressing some of those infrastructure challenges, specifically with the proposed site on Prince of Wales?
Yeah, okay, that's great. Yeah, I think, the task, that grant was through this Build Back Better regional challenge that the EDA had, spending, it was stimulus funds to stimulate the economy, but to build back better by creating new, so it's supposed to be kind of bold economic development themes that could create equitable but also achieve a scale. So that the basis of it were a bunch of different folks, local and others outside that all saw the vision for a large amount of growth and in the industry. But you're right that our cost structure, and others have said that, it's really high and we have a lot of challenges there. So there's all these chicken and egg problems with getting from where we're at now to going through all these awkward phases to having some sort of scale, economies of scale, where we can start to compete or differentiate enough or both, to unlock some new markets that are actually new markets, not just for Alaska, but for the world. There's some of these seaweed markets are not things that have been done before. It's not like we're just taking Asian seaweed markets and trying to capture those, as you guys know. But so one of the chicken and egg problems is in the processing capacity. And so we are trying to develop, and this is actually not through the Build Back Better grant, but through a grant with the Forest Service and others. Where Sally's Conference is leading work on Prince of Wales Island, looking to partner with the community's vision to develop a processing incubator hub where different businesses could do processing activities and scale up their business a bit. And either that would suffice for them, this facility, it could be shared by multiple different businesses with an anchor tenant, hopefully keeping the financials, paying the bills, and would enable people to not have to take on this project of setting up a facility, setting up a building, owning a building. Those kind of steps are just not what the core strength of these businesses need to be, and I think a lot of the businesses would rather lease a facility. They have funding for a couple of years. They don't know what's going to happen after that. So we can take on more of that risk as a sector, and through grant funds, reduce that risk. And by having a place to lease, and hopefully some innovative businesses would be able to get going and kind of max, and some of this is just, we're going to have to throw products out and test what people like, and we want more of that to help more of that happen. So that's on Prince of Wales Island, and there are similar efforts going on in Cordova and Kodiak that I'm aware of, maybe other areas as well that I'm not aware of. And we're funding through the Build Back Better. For instance, you asked a little bit about that. We're funding, I'm just going to click like 3 out of 30 things, but we're funding feasibility studies. So if a community wanted to do a processing plant like that, a shared cold storage processing plant around Mariculture, we could fund a study to help them understand and develop a business plan and a case for it. And then if such a facility existed, we could buy processing equipment for it. Those just 2 things. We are buying equipment also for Sea Grant and different university things to do training programs. And so you can already do a seaweed processing training they hosted their first one this spring in Kodiak. The Sea Grant folks did. So if folks are able to travel or attend remotely some of these events, that's another one that I don't think have been mentioned, but there's some trainings, hands-on seaweed processing trainings, and other, even in the seafood industry space, there's trainings that would be relevant for like seafood processing. Some of the things you would learn about process controls and safety would be relevant for mariculture as well.
Thanks, Dan. There's a lot of opportunity, a lot of resources, and that sounds like a really fascinating project in terms of like eliminating the risk and encouraging innovation and not requiring folks to buy that processing equipment, to buy a building, just to run sort of a cooperative mode and lease space. Because I've heard a lot of the challenges facing the industry in terms of the of product is this really wet product that you have to be able to, process locally, ideally, to avoid transportation costs, and innovatively. I got to see the Barnacle Foods facility recently with some students from UAS, and Max was describing the tumblers, right? That like maybe traditionally seaweed in some parts of the world can be dried in the sun, but not here in Southeast Alaska. Well, it's been great hearing from all the panelists. I would love to open up the opportunity for attendees to ask questions. We have some that have come in that I can address, but please keep those questions coming, and you're welcome to unmute yourself and ask them. Maybe I'll just start with one that came in from Michelle Morris, and any of the panelists are welcome to respond to this. She asked, since kelp harvest is so seasonal, how do you quickly stabilize, preserve the kelp to be made into products year round? Maybe we can ask if Max and Chelsea want to tackle this one.
Yeah, I can jump in on that. I mean, for us with the bullwhip kelp, we're fortunate. A lot of our products like the salsa, the pasta sauces, we're actually able to freeze our kelp. And so currently in Ketchikan, we're working with our local seafood processors to help get our kelp ground down to the size we want it, and then basically freezing it in IQF blocks. And then the kelp freezes really well. Once it's flash frozen like that, it lasts for a really long time. And so we're able to pull it out, when we need to create more of the salsa or the pasta sauces, things like that. The same thing with our sea asparagus. Sea asparagus is a very hardy commodity. It freezes well, and that's very convenient. And then like what we were just talking about with Dan, I mean, there's so many other ways you can, dry kelp, do different things to stabilize the commodity. It's the thing like the pickles that are really a unique challenge where, we have like basically a 7-day window from when we get the bull kelp out of the water to when we need to have it pickled and in the jar without it losing its integrity and its cellular structure and just getting mushy and disgusting. So there really is, I mean, besides just the research that can be done on bullwhip kelp farming itself and what can be done there to really hone in on this like unique Pacific Northwest Alaskan commodity that really is different than a lot of like the sugar kelps and the ribbon kelps. There's that whole body of research that needs to be done. But then in addition, there's so much food science research that could be done with a lot of these wild harvested Alaskan commodities. I mean, bullwhip kelp just being the main one at the forefront of the conversation, but there's just not a lot of knowledge. And, is there a way that you could stabilize something like, a piece of bullwhip kelp stipe so that you don't necessarily have to dry it or freeze it right away? But if you could do something like a different type of saline solution or something like, talking with E.C. Phillips, one of the seafood processors in Ketchikan, they have a huge fishery that they help moderate, which is the herring roe on kelp. And that they ship the materials over to Asia, and they do it in this brine of saline. It's like an 80% saline brine. It's just super high salt content. It goes over there, but it keeps everything preserved in a certain way where it's not frozen because it's so high in salt that like it can't freeze, but it's at the temperature that it would be frozen. So it's, not getting microbes and bacteria and all the things that would happen when something is normally going bad. And so you look at things like that, it's like, okay, well, there's something to that. How could we translate something like that into just preserving bull kelp so that it can be, so the window for pickling it, for example, could be longer than just 7 days. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for research in the food science department as well.
I'd just add that some people are talking about, besides freezing and drying, another potential option is to ferment it or stabilize it through chemicals. So it'd be a wet like slurry that you could process later on throughout the year, stored in like a big silo. And that would be more in the chemicals, kind of producing some nutraceuticals and different processes. It can degrade some of those though. So there's a trade-off. But it is great to expand our minds a little bit and just kind of think that there's different options out there. We just have to figure them out, and people are working on this.
Thanks. Looks like there's another question in the chat that I'm going to ask if Schery could tackle this one. Are you concerned about bull kelp being mentioned for consideration as an endangered species? Sorry to put you on the spot there.
Yes, but it's a good question. I was talking to a colleague from NOAA, and I actually asked her what will be the implications. And the thing is that we don't know very well how this is going to work out, because it can. So my concern was, is all of the bull kelp from the West Coast going to be put into the list of endangered species, or is this going to be a regional situation? And the thing is that right now we don't have the answer to that question. It can very well be that only Oregon bull kelp gets put into the endangered list. It is to some extent concerning if we think in terms of industry that right now relies on wild harvest. So if all of the bull kelp from the West Coast gets put into the endangered list, I don't know how the regulation as far as harvest will go. I think it's too early. It's too early to get concerned. It's just a matter of waiting and understanding how the regulation is going to work, and if it's going to be put in place or not. So nothing to worry about, or nothing to raise alarm, I will say, for now, until we learn more of how this is going to work out.
Thank you. All right, so we're coming up on 8:30 here. Maybe we'll just have a few more questions and then we'll wrap things up. There are a lot of great questions coming in from the chat, trying to keep up on them all. This question was for Chelsea, but I think Max could probably tackle this one. This comes from Jessie Goodman, and she's asking, what is the next unexpected creative product that you might be experimenting with or want to try out?
We have a fair amount, a long list of stuff that's kind of on the back burner that when we have time, we maybe take a step forward or so. But probably what's coming out soonest might be another hot sauce. So our hot sauce is our most popular product. We have 2 different flavors of that, and we're working on a 3rd one. So that's probably coming down the pipeline in the next year or so.
Chelsea, did you want to add anything to that?
No, not in particular. I mean, I think really the sky's the limit. And I think, it is driven by consumers. I think there is a little bit of, putting it out there and seeing what sticks and what people are interested in, because, again, there is objections that a lot of consumers have to an ingredient like kelp or seaweed, because they just have a preconceived notion. And there's also different tastes and different palates in different regions of the country and different things that different areas are familiar with. And so I think seaweed and kelp in general are trending. And I think that there's really just unlimited potential. I mean, when you get into what we've been talking about with like nutraceuticals and supplements and, anything from like ready-made smoothie packets to, pre-made meat. I mean, the sky is the limit. For value-added innovation, really, there's no limit to what could be done. It's really just a matter of us as Alaskans figuring out how we can best manage the raw material in a sustainable way. And then from there, we can really expand and create something that's completely unique and completely Alaskan. And I think it's really exciting.
Thanks, Chelsea. All right, maybe we've got one more question here, and then we'll call it an evening. Thanks everyone for sticking around for this conversation about mariculture and local foods and growing a new industry in Alaska. We have a question from Heather Evoy, and I'll invite any panelists to tackle this one. Are there concerns with the industry as we see increased marine vessel traffic and accompanying pollution in the region, as well as changing ocean chemistries?
I mean, I can speak to some of the research that we're going to be funding through our Build Back Better grant. We're going to do a lot of tissue analysis around different seaweeds to look for both positive attributes, like different concentrations of bioactive substances that are of interest for different markets. Those can change throughout the timing of the year. So we're going to look at that aspect and location, but then also looking at negative attributes that we want to watch out for. So I think the biggest ones that people generally are concerned about are more the metals, heavy metals and stuff like that area, because kelps can concentrate those things if they're present in the water. So that I have heard less concern about marine vessel traffic and the pollution from that, but it's certainly something we need to avoid having those things in the same place. And you know, the greener our industry can be in general, if we're not even using internal combustion engines in our harvesting vessels and stuff, that would be ideal, right? So we're not going to spill any gas on anything, but also because our selling point is a low carbon, as a lower carbon product, partly, you know, for what we're replacing out there in the marketplace. So if we can produce that as low carbon intensively as possible, I don't know, and just maybe we can two birds with one stone here.
I could just add on to that real quick. AFDF has done some work in the past looking at fishing vessel efficiency. To echo Dan, I think people hope that there's a future where we have electric vessels, hybrid vessels. I think we're starting to see that in Europe. There's some fishing fleets that have primarily electric vessels, which is really cool to see that technology is actually starting to work. But I think there's a lot of work that can be done with the boats that we do have, just in terms of making those more efficient with their combustion engines. So people are thinking about that, people are paying attention to it, and it's definitely an area where I think we can grow a lot.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I think that this is it's a new industry, and that we're gonna be learning a lot from every single aspect of what it will mean, especially with scale, right? There's so much about kelp that we don't know, although it is so popular, right? And there's a lot of studies, but there's still a lot that we don't know. And like, for example, with pollution, you know, they can absorb many things, but they cannot absorb them all. So we need to figure it out. We need to figure out what is it that they are accumulating and what is it that they are not, and stuff like that. That will come with time. I mean, we will get there, and we'll find the answers. But yeah, it's a matter of time.
Thank you, Schery. Well, I think we should wrap up this evening. It's been wonderful hearing these responses to audience questions, to panelists probing each other, challenging each other. I'm really excited as a resident of this area and as someone who has already modified my diet for kelp. I've been regularly sampling products from Foraged Found and Barnacle, and really highly recommend take your favorite recipe for Greek spinach pie, spanakopita, and substitute half the spinach for ribbon kelp. You can buy frozen ribbon kelp at several stores, Rainbow Foods in Juneau and elsewhere. But if you look up Seagrove kelp, they'll tell you where else you can buy their product around Southeast Alaska. So consider modifying your diet, find out more about mariculture and kelp, and I hope you'll take the opportunity to read Eat Like a Fish by Bren Smith. There's copies around Juneau, Sitka, and Ketchikan at local libraries and on the UAS Juneau campus. My name is Jonas Lamb. Thank you so much to our panelists and to everybody who is here with us this evening. And I wish you good night.
Thank you.